Ethan Carter set down his toolbox on the polished marble floor of a mansion that cost more than every home he'd ever lived in combined, and 40 pairs of eyes turned to laugh at him. He didn't flinch. He didn't apologize for the grease on his jacket or the mud on his boots. He walked straight past the crowd of tuxedos and champagne glasses, past the woman who'd promised to marry him as a joke, and he stopped in front of the dead Porsche that a dozen millionaires had already given up on. Then he did the one thing nobody in that room expected. He smiled. Because he already knew what was hiding inside that engine, and it was going to destroy someone. But here's what none of them understood yet, that broken Porsche wasn't just broken. It was evidence of a crime. And the man they were laughing at was the only person alive who could prove it. Before we go further, I'd love to know where you're watching from tonight. Drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far this story travels. And if you believe a person's worth isn't measured by what they drive or what they wear, do me a favor and subscribe, because this story is for you. Now let's begin. Part 1. The phone call that changed Ethan Carter's life came on a Tuesday, and he almost didn't answer it. He was under a 1994 Ford pickup flat on his back on a creeper, both hands buried in a transmission that had no business still running. Grease up to his elbows. A bead of sweat rolling into his eye, and his cell phone buzzing on the workbench 3 feet away, dancing toward the edge. "Noah," he called out. "Grab that for me, would you?" His 9-year-old son padded across the garage in his socks, the ones with the little cars on them that he refused to admit were his favorite. Noah picked up the phone, squinted at the screen, and read the name out loud like it was a spelling test. "It says Hayes Investment Group." "That's a fancy name, Dad." "Probably a wrong number." "It might be a rich person." Ethan laughed under the truck. "We don't know any rich people, buddy." "Maybe you're about to." Something in the way the kid said it, matter of fact, certain the way children say things before they've learned to doubt, made Ethan slide out from under the truck. He wiped his hands on a rag that had stopped being clean sometime during the Obama administration, and he took the phone. Carter's garage. The voice on the other end was crisp, female, educated in a way that money buys and effort can't replace. "Am I speaking with Ethan Carter?" "You are. My name is Diane. I am the executive assistant to Ms. Victoria Hayes. Ms. Hayes has a vehicle she'd like you to look at. A vintage Porsche." Ethan glanced at Noah, who was watching him with both eyebrows up, mouthing the word rich and pointing at the phone like he'd solved a mystery. "I do mostly trucks and farm equipment," Ethan said. "There's a Porsche specialist up in Portland, real good outfit I can give you the—" "We've used them," Diane said. "We've used everyone. Portland, Seattle. A team from Stuttgart flew in last spring. Ms. Hayes has spent a considerable amount of money. Mr. Carter in the car still doesn't run. Your name came up because a collector in Bend told her, and I'm quoting him, 'If Carter can't fix it, it can't be fixed.'" Ethan was quiet for a moment. Outside, the Oregon rain was starting again, that soft gray drizzle that never really stopped from October to May. "Who told you that?" "Does it matter?" "It might. Old man named Walter Briggs. Said you brought a '67 Shelby back from the dead for him. Said you did it in a weekend when a shop in California had it for 8 months. Ethan closed his eyes. Walter Briggs. Of course. The old bootlegger with a heart condition and a Rolodex that reached into every rich garage in the Pacific Northwest. "I remember Walter," Ethan said. "So will you come?" Ms. Hayes is prepared to pay for a consultation regardless of outcome. $2,000, just to look. $2,000, just to look. Ethan turned, so Noah couldn't see his face, because his face would have told the kid everything: that the mortgage was 2 months behind, that the garage lease was up for renewal, and the landlord had already mentioned a market adjustment, that the check engine light on their own truck had been on since April, and Ethan had been ignoring it the way a man ignores a lump he doesn't want to think about. $2,000. Just to look. "Text me the address," he said. "What did?" The Hayes estate sat on a bluff above the Columbia River, behind a gate that opened before Ethan even got out of his truck, as if the house itself had been expecting him and found him lacking. He drove up a driveway longer than the street he lived on, past hedges trimmed into shapes that took a full-time crew, past a fountain, past a garage. A garage that was bigger than his entire shop, with a row of doors that looked like they belonged on an airport hangar. He parked his rattling pickup next to a Bentley and immediately felt the difference, the way you feel cold water. He was aware suddenly of his jacket, of the grease he could never fully scrub out of the creases of his knuckles, of the fact that he'd cut himself shaving that morning and there was still a little fleck of tissue on his jaw. He almost turned around. Then he thought about Noah's socks with the little cars on them, and the fact that the boy had outgrown 3 pairs of shoes that year, and he turned off the engine and got out. There was a party happening. That was the first thing that threw him. He'd expected a quiet consultation. Instead, there was a tent on the lawn, and valets, and a string quartet, and 40 or 50 people in the kind of clothes that don't have prices, they have provenance. Somewhere, a caterer was passing something on a silver tray. Somewhere, a woman was laughing at a joke that wasn't funny. A young man in a vest intercepted him before he'd taken 10 steps. "Deliveries are around back," the young man said, not unkindly, just automatically, the way you'd correct a child who'd wandered into the wrong classroom. "I'm not a delivery," Ethan said. "I'm here to see Ms. Hayes. About the car." The young man looked at him, the jacket, the boots, the toolbox in his hand, and something flickered behind his eyes. Amusement maybe, or pity. "One moment." He disappeared into the tent. Ethan stood on the manicured lawn holding his toolbox, and he was aware of eyes finding him. A couple near the fountain. A man with silver hair and a glass of something amber. A woman in green who leaned to whisper to her friend, and the friend laughed, and they both looked at Ethan and looked away. He'd felt this before. Every man who works with his hands has felt this. The specific weightlessness of being seen and instantly filed under not one of us. He set his jaw and waited. And then she came out of the tent. Victoria Hayes was 34 years old, and she moved through her own party like a blade through water. No wasted motion, no warmth. A woman who had learned somewhere along the way that softness was a liability she couldn't afford. She wore black. She always wore black. And she came across the lawn toward Ethan with the expression of someone inspecting a shipment that had arrived damaged. "You're the mechanic," she said. Not a question. "Ethan Carter." He put out his hand. She looked at his hand, at the grease in the creases of it, and she did not take it. "You drove all this way," she said, "to tell me my Porsche can't be fixed." Behind her, the young man in the vest had returned, and a small cluster of guests had drifted over, sensing entertainment the way sharks sense blood. The man with silver hair, the woman in green, a few others. Ethan lowered his unshaken hand slowly. "I haven't looked at it yet," he said. "No," Victoria said. "But you will, and then you'll tell me what everyone tells me, that the engine is impossible, that the tolerances are wrong, that the previous work was botched, that it would cost more to fix than it's worth." She tilted her head. "You'll charge me $2,000 to say what 6 other men have already said, and you'll drive home in that?" She glanced at his truck, "and you'll feel very good about your $2,000. The silver-haired man chuckled. "Victoria, be gentle. He came a long way." "I'm being generous, Marcus. I'm saving him the trouble." Ethan didn't move. He'd learned a long time ago that the worst thing you can do with a hard person is get soft, and the second worst thing is get hard back. So he just stood there holding his toolbox, and he let her words land and fall to the ground where they belonged. "You may be right," he said finally. That surprised her. He could see it, a flicker quickly hidden. "Then why come?" "Because I don't know yet, and neither do you, and neither did the 6 men before me." He shrugged. "Machines don't lie, Ms. Hayes. People do. But machines. A machine will always tell you the truth if you know how to listen. So before I tell you your car can't be fixed, I'd like to at least do it the courtesy of listening to it." There was a silence on the lawn. The woman in green stopped smiling, and Victoria Hayes looked at Ethan Carter. For the first time, really looked the way you look at a thing that has surprised you, and something moved behind her eyes that she would spend the next several months pretending hadn't. Then she recovered. Because women like Victoria always recover, and always in public, and always with a joke that puts the little people back in their place. She smiled. It was a beautiful smile, and it had no warmth in it at all. Tell you what, Mr. Carter. She raised her voice just slightly so the guests could hear. Fix my Porsche, actually fix it, make it run, and I'll marry you. The lawn erupted. They laughed, all of them. The man in the vest, the woman in green, the whole glittering crowd of them, because it was the funniest thing they'd heard all evening. This grease-stained nobody in his muddy boots and the untouchable Victoria Hayes offering herself as a prize he could never win. They laughed and they laughed. Everyone laughed. Everyone except Ethan, and everyone except the boy. But the boy wasn't there yet. That comes later. Ethan waited for the laughter to die down. He didn't blush. He didn't smile along to show he was a good sport. He simply waited patient as a stone, and when it was quiet again, he said, "Where's the car, da?" The garage, Victoria's garage. The airport hangar 1 held 6 vehicles, and 5 of them were worth more than most people's retirement accounts. But it was the 6th that made Ethan Carter's breath catch in his throat, and it made his breath catch for a reason that had nothing to do with money. It was a Porsche 911. Early. Air-cooled. The kind of car that men who love cars speak about in hushed, almost religious tones. Silver blue, or it had been once before someone let it sit. The paint was still good. The chrome still caught the light. From the outside, it was a museum piece. But Ethan wasn't looking at the outside. He was looking at it the way a doctor looks at a patient, and something in his chest had gone very quiet and very still because he knew this car. He didn't know how he knew it, but he knew it the way you know a voice on the phone before the person says their name. Well, Victoria had followed him in, and a few of the guests too. Marcus among them, still holding his amber drink. Go on, listen to it. Isn't that what you do? Ethan set his toolbox down on the concrete. He took off his jacket, folded it, laid it over a workbench. He rolled up his sleeves, and then he opened the engine cover. For a moment, nobody said anything because there was nothing to say. It was an engine. To the guests, it was just a complicated arrangement of metal. Beautiful the way expensive things are beautiful. Mysterious the way expensive things are mysterious. But Ethan Carter stood over that engine, and the silence in his chest turned into something else. It turned into recognition. Then it turned into disbelief. Then slowly, it turned into a cold, quiet anger. The kind of anger that doesn't shout, the kind that a man feels when he sees something beautiful that somebody has hurt on purpose. He stood there for 10 full seconds without moving. "What is it?" Victoria asked, and for the first time her voice had lost its edge. "Mr. Carter?" "What?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He reached into the engine bay. His fingers found a component near the base, a fuel distribution unit. If you want the technical name for it, though, the name doesn't matter, and he ran his thumb along a seam where 2 pieces of metal met, and he felt it. The thing that 6 other mechanics, 6 brilliant, well-paid mechanics with their laptops and their diagnostic machines and their factory training had never felt because they'd been reading screens instead of listening. He felt that the seam was wrong. "This part," Ethan said quietly, "isn't original." Marcus from the doorway laughed. "Of course it's not original. It's been serviced a dozen times. Parts get replaced. That's what mechanics do. I'd think you of all people would know that." Ethan didn't look up. "Parts get replaced," he agreed. "Sure, but you replace a part with a better part, or the same part, or at least a part that works." He tapped the metal. "Whoever put this here didn't do that. This part is beautiful. Perfect finish. Cost a fortune, I'd guess. And it's designed—" He paused. And now he did look up, and he looked directly at Marcus, though he had no reason yet to know why. "It's designed to fail. It's a counterfeit built to look right and never run right. Somebody didn't fix this car. Somebody killed it, on purpose. And they spent good money to make sure nobody could tell." The garage went very, very quiet. Victoria stepped forward. "That's absurd. Who would do that? Why would anyone?" "I don't know why," Ethan said. "Not yet." Then how can you possibly? Because I've seen this engine before, Ethan said. And that stopped her. That stopped everyone. I don't just mean a car like this, he went on, and his voice had dropped, and there was something in it now, some old grief rising up. I mean this engine. This specific block. I know the man who built it. I know the way he numbered his work. I know it because... He swallowed. Because I was there when he built it. 20 years ago. I was a kid. An apprentice. And this was the last engine he ever finished before he died. Victoria's face had gone pale. That's not possible, she whispered. This car was my father's. He commissioned it. He had it built by a master, a man who... His name was Henry Osgood, Ethan said. Victoria's glass, she'd been holding a glass this whole time, Ethan realized, and now her fingers went white around it. How do you know that name? She said. Because Henry Osgood taught me everything I know, Ethan said. He pulled me out of a bad situation when I was 17. Gave me a trade. Gave me a reason to get up in the morning. And when he built your father's Porsche, this Porsche, the one you've been telling everyone is impossible, I was the kid holding the light. Nobody laughed now. The woman in green had left. The man in the vest was gone. It was just Victoria and Ethan and Marcus in the doorway with his amber drink and a dead Porsche between them that had just stopped being a car and started being a question. Victoria set her glass down on the workbench. Her hand was not quite steady. You need to leave, she said. Ethan blinked. What? You need to leave, right now. Ms. Hayes, I just told you your car. You just told me a story, she said, and her voice was climbing, and the fear underneath it was making it sharp. A very convenient story about how you happen to know my father's mechanic, and you happen to know this engine. And there happens to be some conspiracy, some sabotage, some you show up in your truck, and within 5 minutes, you're telling me the most valuable thing my father left me has been the target of a crime. Do you understand how that sounds? I understand it sounds crazy, Ethan said. I understand it. But it's the truth, and I can prove it if you just get out. Chet. He drove home in the rain with $2,000 in his pocket that suddenly felt like the worst money he'd ever earned. Noah was asleep on the couch when he got in a school library book open on his chest, the TV playing to nobody. Ethan turned it off, and he lifted the book and he read the spine, something about airplanes the boy was into, airplanes that month, and he set it on the coffee table, and he sat down in the dark next to his sleeping son, and he put his face in his hands. He should have kept his mouth shut. That was the lesson, wasn't it? That was always the lesson. Nobody wants the truth. Nobody thanks you for the truth. The truth is a thing that costs the man who tells it and rarely pays him back. He'd walked into that woman's garage and seen his old mentor's fingerprints on a murdered engine, and something in him, the 17-year-old kid who Henry Osgood had saved. The kid who'd believed a machine was an honest thing in a dishonest world, that kid had spoken up. And now she thought he was a con man or a lunatic, and he'd never see that Porsche again. And Henry's last great work would sit in a rich woman's garage as a monument to a crime nobody would ever solve. Dad. Noah was awake, sitting up, rubbing his eyes. Hey, buddy, go back to sleep. You're sad. I'm just tired. No. Noah scooted closer the way he did, tucking himself against his father's side, and Ethan put an arm around him, without thinking the way he'd done 10,000 times since the boy's mother had died. You do the tired thing when you're tired. You're doing the sad thing. You do the sad thing with your hands. Ethan looked down at his own hands. His son was right. He hadn't even noticed. He'd been wringing them the way you wring out a rag. Did the rich person yell at you? Ethan laughed a short, surprised sound. How'd you know it was a rich person? 'Cause you always come home like this after rich people. Noah said it without any bitterness, just as a fact of the world, the way he'd note that it rained a lot, or that Mrs. Petrov next door had a mean cat. Rich people are the ones who make you do the sad hands thing. And that undid something in Ethan. That a 9-year-old had watched him closely enough and often enough to know the choreography of his father's quiet defeats. I found something today, Ethan said. Something that got me in trouble. What'd you find? I found out somebody hurt something on purpose, something beautiful, and I tried to tell the lady who owns it and she got scared and told me to leave. Noah thought about this with the total seriousness that children bring to serious things. Was it true what you told her? Yeah, it was true. Then why'd she get scared? Ethan looked at his son and realized he didn't have an answer, and that not having an answer was itself the answer. Sometimes, he said slowly, people would rather believe a nice lie than a scary truth. Because the lie lets them keep going the way they were going. And the truth means everything has to change. Noah nodded like this made perfect sense, which to a child it probably did. But you told her anyway, Noah said. I did. Even though it got you in trouble. Yeah. Why? And Ethan gave him the answer that his own mentor Henry Osgood had given a scared 17-year-old 2 decades before in a garage that smelled of oil and coffee and second chances. Because doing the right thing, Ethan said, isn't about whether the other person deserves it. It's about who you decide to be. You don't tell the truth because they earned it. You tell the truth because you're a man who tells the truth. And if you start deciding who deserves it and who doesn't, pretty soon, you're not that man anymore. You're just another guy with a price. Noah was quiet for a while. Henry told you that, he said. It wasn't a guess. The boy had heard the name his whole life. Yeah, Ethan said, and his voice caught. Henry told me that. I wish I could have met him. Me too, buddy. He would have liked you. Ethan pulled his son a little closer. He would have liked you a lot. The phone rang at 6:40 the next morning. Ethan was in the kitchen making the eggs the way Noah liked them, which was to say, ruined, scrambled to a rubbery brown that no adult on earth would eat. And the phone rang, and it was the same number. Hayes Investment Group. He almost didn't answer it. His thumb hovered over the decline. He thought about the way she'd said, "Get out." He thought about his own pride, which was a small poor thing, but the only thing he owned outright. Then he thought about Henry's engine sitting in that garage. He answered, Carter's garage. But it wasn't the crisp assistant this time. It was Victoria Hayes herself, and she didn't sound like a CEO. She sounded like a woman who hadn't slept. I looked him up, she said without hello. Henry Osgood. I found the commission papers in my father's files. Everything you said, the name, the date, all of it. You were right. My father did hire a man named Henry Osgood to build that car 21 years ago. And there's Mr. Carter. There's a photograph. In the file. Of the workshop. Of the team. Ethan gripped the counter. And there's a boy in it, Victoria said, and her voice broke a little on the word. A skinny kid, maybe 17, holding a work light, and on the back my father wrote a note. He wrote the names of everyone in the shop. A pause. One of the names is Ethan. The eggs were burning. Ethan didn't move. I owe you an apology, Victoria said. I owe you a very large apology, and I'm not a person who's good at those, so I'm going to skip it and get to the part that matters. If you were telling the truth about who you are, then you might be telling the truth about the rest of it, about the sabotage, about someone doing it on purpose. She took a breath. I need to know who, and I need to know why. And I think you're the only person on earth who can tell me. Ethan turned off the stove. Ms. Hayes. Victoria. Victoria. He closed his eyes. You understand what you're asking? If I'm right, if somebody killed that engine on purpose and spent real money doing it, then somebody with access to your father's things did it. Somebody your father trusted. And when I start pulling on that thread, I don't know what comes out. It might be something small. Or it might be the kind of thing that ends careers. Ruins lives. You sure you want to know? There was a long silence on the line. And then Victoria Hayes, who had everything money could buy and had just discovered that the one thing her father left her had been quietly poisoned, said the 4 words that started everything. My father was murdered. Ethan's blood went cold. He died of a heart attack 14 months ago, Victoria said, and now the words were coming fast, the way they do when a person has held something back for a long time. That's what everyone believes. That's what I believed. But he was healthy, Mr. Carter. He ran every morning. He'd just gotten a physical. And 2 days before he died, he called me. I was in London. I almost didn't pick up. I was busy. Her voice cracked hard here, and Ethan heard underneath the CEO, underneath the money and the black clothes and the cold, a daughter who had lost her father and never gotten to say goodbye. He called me and he said he'd found something, in the accounts, something that didn't add up. He said he needed to talk to me when I got home. He said, and I'll never forget it, he said, "Vicky, I think I've been trusting the wrong man for a very long time." Ethan didn't breathe. "And then he was dead," Victoria said. "And I told myself it was grief making me suspicious. I told myself I was seeing patterns that weren't there. Everyone told me that. My board told me that. My lawyers told me that. Marcus told me that." A pause and something shifted in her voice on that name, some new thing waking up. "Marcus told me that most of all." "Marcus," Ethan repeated. "The silver-haired man. At the party. Marcus Vale, my father's financial advisor. His right hand for 30 years. The man who managed everything." A breath. "The man who told me the Porsche was worthless. The man who arranged every mechanic who came to look at it and mysteriously failed. The man who an hour ago, when I mentioned I'd looked up Henry Osgood's file, went very quiet and asked me very casually why I was digging through my father's old papers." Ethan stood in his kitchen with the smell of burnt eggs and the gray Oregon morning at the window, and his son's cartoon voices drifting in from the other room, and he understood that his life had just changed, and there was no going back to the small, safe shape of it. "Victoria," he said, "where's the car right now?" "In my garage, where it's always been." "Why?" "Because that car isn't just a car. If Henry built it, and if I'm right about that fake part, then whatever your father found, whatever got him killed, I think the proof is inside that engine. I think that's why nobody was allowed to fix it. Not because it couldn't be fixed, because if it ever ran again, if anybody ever really took it apart, they'd find the thing your father found." He gripped the phone. "Don't tell anyone I said this. Don't tell Marcus. Don't tell your board. Don't tell your lawyers. Get that car somewhere safe, somewhere only you know about, and do it today. Do it now." There was a silence. "You believe me," Victoria said, and it wasn't a question, and there was something raw and astonished in it, as if she had spent 14 months screaming into a room where no one would look at her, and a stranger in muddy boots had finally turned around. "I believe you," Ethan said. "And I'm sorry. I'm sorry it took a broken engine and a grease-stained nobody to be the first one to say it. But yeah, I believe you. And I think your father was a good man who found out something terrible, and I think the machine he loved has been sitting in your garage this whole time trying to tell you the truth. Machines don't lie, Victoria. I told you that yesterday and you thought I was being poetic. I wasn't. That car has been holding your father's last message for over a year, and everyone who looked at it was too busy reading screens to hear it screaming." He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "Come back," she said. "Please, come back and make it run." "I'll come back," Ethan said. "But understand something. The second I start taking that engine apart, we're not fixing a car anymore. We're opening a grave. And the man who dug it is still in your life, still smiling, still managing your money and your father's foundation, and God knows what else. And when he figures out what we're doing, and he is going to come at us with everything he has. And he has a lot, Victoria. He has more than you know." "I don't care," Victoria said. "You should care. You've got a company, a reputation, a life." "My father called me," Victoria said, and her voice was steel now. Steel that had been forged in 14 months of being told she was crazy. And he said he'd been trusting the wrong man, and then he died, and I picked up my phone and went back to my meeting. I have spent every day since wishing I had asked one more question. So no, Mr. Carter, I don't care about my reputation. I want to know who killed my father. And if you can hear the truth in a dead engine, then you're going to help me hear it, and I don't care what it costs." Ethan looked out at the rain. In the other room, Noah laughed at something on the television, a bright, easy 9-year-old laugh. The sound of a kid who trusted that his father would always come home, that the world was mostly safe, that the man in the kitchen would keep it that way. Ethan thought about that laugh. He thought about how much he had to lose. He thought about how the smart thing, the safe thing, the thing any reasonable man would do, was to keep the $2,000 and forget he'd ever opened that engine cover. And then he thought about Henry Osgood dead 20 years, and a skinny, scared 17-year-old holding a work light, and a voice saying, "You don't tell the truth because they earned it. You tell the truth because you're a man who tells the truth." "Okay," Ethan said. "Okay. I'll come back today, but we do it my way. Quiet. Careful. And the first thing we do before I touch that engine, before we do anything." He looked toward the sound of his son's laughter. "We make sure Marcus Vale doesn't know we've figured out a single thing. Because right now, we've got exactly one advantage, Victoria. He thinks you still believe him. He thinks I'm just a mechanic you threw off your property. He thinks that engine is a secret only he can hear." Ethan set his jaw. "Let's not correct him. Not yet." He hung up the phone. He stood there for a long moment in his small kitchen, in his small life at the edge of something enormous. Then he walked into the living room where his son was sprawled on the floor with a cartoon and a juice box, and he crouched down beside him, and Noah looked up at him and immediately said, "You're not doing the sad hands thing anymore." "No," Ethan said, "I'm not." "What are you doing instead?" Ethan didn't have a word for it. It wasn't happiness. It was heavier than that, and better than that. It was the feeling a man gets when a road opens up in front of him that he knows is going to be hard and dangerous, and right the specific and terrible relief of finally having something worth doing. "I'm going back to fix that car," Ethan said. Noah's whole face lit up. "The beautiful one. The one somebody hurt on purpose." "That's the one." "Are you going to find out who did it?" Ethan looked at his son, this small, serious boy who noticed everything, who watched his father's hands to read his father's heart, who at 9 years old already understood more about the difference between what a person owns and what a person is worth than most of the millionaires laughing on that lawn ever would. "Yeah, buddy," Ethan said. "I think I am." And somewhere across the county in a garage that cost more than a house, a silver-blue Porsche sat waiting in the dark, the last work of a dead master holding inside its ruined engine the answer to a question that had already killed one good man and would very nearly kill another before it was through. But it would not stay silent much longer, because for the first time in over a year, someone was finally coming to listen. Ethan came back that afternoon, and he came back different. He didn't pull up the long driveway in his rattling truck this time. Victoria had told him to park at the service entrance behind the property, the one the caterers used, and he'd understood without being told why. If they were going to keep Marcus Vale in the dark, then the mechanic couldn't be seen arriving like a guest. He had to arrive like a man who'd been hired to do a small job and would be gone by dinner. Victoria met him at the garage door herself. No assistant, no staff. "I sent everyone home," she said. "Told them I was taking a personal day. Told them I didn't want to be disturbed. And Marcus? Marcus is in the city. Aboard lunch he couldn't move." She glanced over her shoulder, a quick, nervous motion that a woman like her had probably never made in her life before that week. "We have maybe 4 hours before anyone thinks to check on me." "Then let's not waste them." She led him inside, and Ethan set his toolbox down beside the Porsche, and for a second, neither of them said anything. The car sat there in the cool dim of the garage, exactly as it had the day before, silver blue and silent, and the difference now was that both of them knew what it was hiding. "Where do we start?" Victoria asked. "We start by you telling me everything you know about the day your father died," Ethan said, and he pulled a rolling stool over and sat down in front of the open engine, but he was looking at her. "Not the version you tell people, the real one, because I need to understand what he found before I go looking for where he hid it." Victoria wrapped her arms around herself. "He was at the office late," she said. "Alone. That wasn't unusual. He worked late all the time, But this was the security log showed he'd been in the archive room. The old paper files. Records going back 30 years, things that were digitized ages ago, so there was no reason for him to be in there. But he was. For 3 hours. And the next day he called me in London. Told me he'd found something in the accounts, something that didn't add up. Told me not to talk to anyone about it. And 2 days after that, the housekeeper found him on the floor of his home office. Heart attack. That's what the coroner said. Her jaw tightened. Marcus handled everything. The arrangements, the press. He was very kind, very steady. He kept saying, "Let me carry this for you, Victoria. You have a company to run." And I let him. God help me, I let him. Ethan nodded slowly, and he turned to the engine, and he began gently to work. "Here's what I think happened," he said, and his hands moved as he talked, loosening a clamp, easing a line free. "I think your father found something in those account records, something about money. And I think he didn't fully understand what he was looking at, or he didn't want to believe it, so he did what any careful man would do. He looked for proof, something physical, something that couldn't be deleted or explained away." He glanced up. "And I think he already had it. Right here. In this car." "You keep saying that, but how it's an engine?" "Come here," Ethan said. "Look." She came and crouched beside him, and he pointed with a greasy finger at the component he'd found the day before, the fuel unit with the wrong seam. "This part," he said. "This is the fake. Somebody pulled the original and put this in. Now watch." He took a small flashlight from his pocket and shone it along the base of the unit. "See that, where the mounting bracket is, there's a machined channel there, a little hollow. That's not stock. Porsche never built it that way. Henry never built it that way. Somebody added that after." "A hollow," Victoria leaned in. "You mean like a hiding place," Ethan said. "Yeah, like a compartment." "And what's in it?" "Nothing," Ethan said. "Now, it's empty. Whoever swapped the parts took whatever was in there, but they left the original mounting because to change it out completely would have meant remachining the whole block, and that would have been noticeable to somebody who knew what they were looking at." He sat back. "They were sloppy in one place, Victoria. Just one. They thought nobody would ever get this far, because they made sure nobody could ever fix the car well enough to get this deep into it. But they left the compartment. And an empty compartment tells me two things. One, your father hid something in his own car. Two, somebody found it and took it." Victoria's face had gone white. "Marcus, maybe, probably. But we can't prove it yet, and that's the problem. Right now, all we've got is an empty hole and a mechanic's hunch, and a hunch doesn't hold up anywhere that matters." Ethan wiped his hands. "So here's the question. Your father was a careful man. Careful men make copies. If he hid one thing in this car, and he was scared enough to hide it, he didn't put all his eggs in one basket. He hid a second thing somewhere else. And he would have hidden it somewhere only you would think to look. He didn't leave me anything," Victoria said. "No letter, no nothing. Marcus went through everything, the will, the estate, all of it, and there was nothing." "Marcus went through everything," Ethan repeated. "That's exactly the point. Marcus had access to everything. So it wouldn't be in the obvious places because Marcus got there first. It'd be somewhere Marcus wouldn't think to look. Somewhere personal, between you and your dad." He looked at her. "Was there a place like that? Something the two of you shared that nobody else knew about?" Victoria opened her mouth to say no, and then she stopped. Ethan watched something move across her face, a memory surfacing the way a body surfaces in dark water, and her hand came up to her mouth. "The lake house," she whispered. We had a cabin up at Trillium Lake. My mother's family owned it. After she died, my father and I would go up there, just the two of us, every fall. It's the only place the only place he'd talk about her. About anything." Her eyes filled. "There's a floorboard by the fireplace. When I was a little girl, I used to hide things there. Notes. A tooth I lost. My father knew about it. It was a joke between us, the secret drawer he called it. Nobody else knew. Not even my mother when she was alive. Just us." Ethan set down his wrench. Victoria, he said quietly. When's the last time you were at that cabin? Not since the funeral. I couldn't go back there without him. Then I think you need to go this week. And I think you need to check that floorboard. She stared at him. You really believe he left something? I believe a careful, frightened man who found out he'd been robbed, and who told his daughter he'd been trusting the wrong person, and who died 2 days later. I believe a man like that did everything he could to make sure the truth survived him. And I believe he'd trust it to the one place in the world that was just for the two of you. Ethan held her gaze. Yeah, I believe he left you something. And I think Marcus has spent 14 months making sure you'd never go looking for it. Victoria pressed her hand flat against the fender of the Porsche, as if steadying herself against the whole tilting world. I'll go tomorrow, she said. First thing. Alone. Who else would I take? Ethan hesitated, and then he said the thing he'd been turning over since the drive up. Take me. Not because I don't trust you to check a floorboard. Because if there's something there, and if it's what we think it is, you shouldn't be alone with it. And you shouldn't be alone on that road. He met her eyes. You're not being paranoid anymore, Victoria. You never were. Your father called it. He trusted the wrong man, and that man is still here. From this point on, you assume you're being watched. Because you probably are. She should have laughed. A week ago, she would have laughed. She didn't laugh. Tomorrow, she said. 7 a.m. Bring the boy. Ethan blinked. Noah, you have a son. You told me. 9 years old. You're not going to leave him home alone while we drive 2 hours into the mountains chasing a dead man's secret, and I'm not going to ask you to. She almost smiled, and it was the first almost real one he'd seen from her. Besides, if we're going to a cabin, somebody should have a good time. Let the kid fish. Nay. They didn't make it to 7 a.m. the next day, because at 9:40 that night, Ethan's phone rang, and it was Victoria, and her voice was wrong. He's here, she said low and fast. Marcus, he wasn't supposed to come back tonight. He was supposed to stay in the city, and he just showed up at my door with a bottle of wine and a story about wanting to check on me and Ethan. He asked about you. Ethan sat up straight in the dark of his living room. What do you mean he asked about me? He asked if I'd had the car looked at again. He said it so casually he was pouring the wine. He wasn't even looking at me, he said. You know, I heard that mechanic came back to the house today, the one from the party. Her breath was ragged. How does he know that I sent everyone home? Nobody saw you come. Ethan's stomach dropped. Somebody saw, he said. Or there's a camera you don't know about. Or, and here it was, the cold thing crawling up his spine. Or your house has watched Victoria. Not by your security, by his. He's had someone on you this whole time, since your father died. Maybe before. That's not possible. You told me your father said he'd been trusting the wrong man for a very long time. How long is a very long time for a man who managed your father's money for 30 years? This isn't a mistake Marcus made last month. Whatever this is, it's old. And a man doesn't run a scheme that old and that big without knowing exactly what everyone around him is doing at all times. Ethan was already up, already moving, already thinking about Noah asleep down the hall. What did you tell him when he asked about me? I laughed it off. I said you'd come to give me a second opinion and told me the same thing as everyone else. That the car was junk. That I was thinking of selling it for parts. That's good. That's perfect. What did he say? There was a pause. He smiled, Victoria said. He said, That's probably wise, Victoria. Some things are worth more gone than kept. Ethan closed his eyes. Some things are worth more gone than kept. The man wasn't even hiding it. He was standing in her kitchen pouring her wine and telling her to her face. Get him out of your house, Ethan said. Tonight, whatever you have to say, get him out. Lock your doors and do not mention the lake house. Not tomorrow, not ever, not even in a room you think is empty. If he's watching you, he doesn't know about the cabin. It's the one card we're holding that he can't see. We do not show it. And the trip. Shit. We still go, but not at 7 and not from your house. Meet me in town. There's a diner off Route 26, the Riverside, open at 6. Come alone, take a different car if you've got one that isn't in your name, and make sure nobody's behind you." He paused. "Can you do that? Can you lose a tail?" A dry laugh came down the line, shaky but real. "Mr. Carter, I've spent 10 years in rooms full of men trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. I think I can manage to drive to a diner." "Good," Ethan said. "Now get him out of your house. And Victoria, call me when he's gone. I'm not going to sleep until you do." He hung up. He stood in the dark for a long moment. Then he walked down the hall and cracked the door to Noah's room, and he looked at his son sleeping there in the glow of a nightlight shaped like a rocket ship, one arm flung over his head, breathing slow and easy and safe. And Ethan understood, standing in that doorway, that he was about to take his boy into something. That the smart father, the careful father, would find a babysitter, would keep the kid 100 miles from any of this. But he also understood something colder, that if Marcus Vale was watching Victoria, and if Marcus Vale had figured out that the mechanic mattered, then there was no such thing as away anymore. There was only near where Ethan could see him, and far where he couldn't. He'd keep the boy near. The phone buzzed 40 minutes later. A single text from Victoria. "He's gone. I'm okay. See you at 6. Ethan let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding since the party. He did not sleep much. Whoa, the Riverside Diner at 6 a.m. smelled like coffee and bacon grease, and there were maybe 4 people in it. All of them men in work jackets who looked like Ethan and had exactly zero interest in anyone else's business. Victoria walked in at 6:04 wearing jeans and a plain gray coat and no makeup, and Ethan almost didn't recognize her because she looked for the first time like a person instead of a headline. Noah was already halfway through a stack of pancakes. "Are you the rich lady?" he asked around a mouthful. "Noah," Ethan said. "It's fine." Victoria slid into the booth across from them. She looked at the boy for a long moment, and something in her expression softened in a way Ethan hadn't seen before. "Yes," she said. "I'm the rich lady. My dad says you got scared and yelled at him." "Noah." "I did," Victoria said. "I got very scared, and I yelled at your father, and I was wrong to do it. He was trying to help me, and I couldn't see it because sometimes when people are scared, they push away the person who's actually telling them the truth." She picked up the boy's fork and stole a bite of his pancakes, and Noah's eyes went wide with delight and outrage. "Your dad's a good man. You should know that. Not everybody gets to have a good man for a father." Noah considered this with total seriousness. "You don't have to yell anymore," he offered, "if you don't want to." Victoria laughed, and it caught in her throat and came out wet, and she looked away fast out the window at the gray river, and Ethan pretended not to see her wipe her eye with the back of her hand. "No," she said. "I don't think I do." They drove up in Ethan's truck because it was the least noticeable vehicle any of them owned, and because if anyone was watching for Victoria's cars, they wouldn't be watching for a beat-up Ford. Noah sat in the middle, chattering about airplanes and fish, and whether the cabin had a boat, and the mountains climbed up green and wet around them. And for 2 hours, it was almost possible to forget what they were driving toward. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road, small and weathered, with a stone chimney and a porch that sagged on one side. Victoria stood in front of it for a long moment before she went in. "I haven't been here since I was 33 years old, and my whole life still made sense," she said quietly. "It feels like 100 years ago." Inside, it smelled of dust and old wood smoke. There were photographs on the mantel, a younger Victoria gap-toothed, holding up a fish, a man with kind eyes, and Victoria's exact jawline, his arm around a woman who had to be her mother. Ethan looked at the man in the photo and thought, "There you are. There's the man Marcus Vale killed." Victoria knelt by the fireplace. Her hand hovered over the floorboards. "Which one?" Ethan asked gently. "The third from the hearth. There's a knot in it shaped like a..." She pressed, and something clicked, and the board lifted, and she stopped talking, because underneath it, in the dark little hollow where a little girl had once hidden lost teeth and secret notes, there was something. An envelope. Thick. Sealed. And on the front, in a firm, old-fashioned hand, one word, Vicky. Victoria made a sound that wasn't a word. Noah, who had wandered in from the porch, said softly, "Is that from your dad?" Nobody answered him. Victoria's hands were shaking too hard to open the envelope, so Ethan reached over and steadied her wrists just for a second, and she looked at him and then she tore it open. Inside were papers, photocopies of account statements, columns of figures, dates, transfers, and a letter 3 pages in the same firm hand. Victoria read it standing up. Ethan watched her face as she read, and he watched 14 months of grief and doubt and gaslighting break apart on it, like ice going out on a spring river. She got to the bottom of the first page and made a sound. She got to the second page and sat down hard on the dusty floor. She got to the third page and put her hand over her mouth and started silently to cry. "Victoria," Ethan said, "what does it say?" She couldn't speak. She just held the letter out to him. Ethan took it, and he read. It was addressed to her, of course. It was the letter of a father who suspected he might not get the chance to say these things out loud. It said that he loved her. It said he was proud of her, prouder than he'd ever managed to tell her, and that he was sorry for the years he'd put the company first. And then it said the other thing, the thing that mattered. Written plain, no hedging, a careful man being careful, right up to the end. Marcus has been stealing from us for at least 12 years, not skimming, stealing. Whole accounts hidden inside the foundation funneled through shell companies I only found because I couldn't sleep and started reading the old paper files by hand. It is millions, Vicky. It may be much more than millions. I have put the primary proof in the one place he would never think to look, the place Henry built for me. If you are reading this letter, then something has happened to me, and you must not trust it was natural, and you must not trust Marcus, and you must not go to him or to anyone he controls. And God help me, that may be more people than I know. Take the proof from the car to a man named Robert Feld at the Justice Department, no one else. And Vicky, I am so sorry. I trusted him because your grandfather trusted him, and I never once looked at his hands. Watch a man's hands, sweetheart, not his smile. Ethan lowered the letter. The place Henry built for me. The one place he would never think to look. The compartment. Ethan breathed. In the engine, that's what he means. He put the real proof in the car in the hollow. Henry machined into the block, and then Marcus found it, and took it, and swapped in the fake part, and made sure the car could never be examined. That's the whole thing, Victoria. That's why the Porsche had to stay broken, not for its value, because it was a safe, and your father's proof was inside it. And Marcus has it now, Victoria said, her voice hollow. Whatever was in that car, he took it. So we have... She gestured at the papers in her lap. We have this. But my father says the primary proof was in the car. This is his copy, his backup. Is it enough? Ethan looked at the photocopied statements. Rows of figures. Shell companies. 12 years of theft laid out in a dead man's careful hand. I don't know, he admitted. I'm a mechanic, not a lawyer. It might be enough to open an investigation. It might not be enough to survive Marcus's lawyers, and a man who's stolen this much can afford a lot of lawyers. He set the papers down. But it doesn't matter because we're not going to bet everything on might. Your father named a name, Robert Feld, Justice Department. That's who we take this to, not the local police who Marcus might own. Not your board who Marcus definitely has friends on. Feld, nobody else. Noah had gone very still in the doorway. Dad, he said. 1 second, buddy. Dad? The boy's voice was different now, thin and scared, and it cut through everything. There's a car outside, coming up the road. It's black and it's going slow. Ethan was on his feet before the sentence finished. He crossed to the window in 3 steps and looked out, and Noah was right there, was a car, a black SUV crawling up the dirt road toward the cabin, and it was slowing down, and it was stopping, and 2 men were getting out of it, and neither of them was dressed like a man who'd come up to the mountains to fish. Victoria came to the window beside him, and Ethan heard the breath go out of her. That's Marcus's security, she whispered. The tall one, that's Reyes. He drives Marcus. You said nobody followed you. Nobody did. I made sure. I swear to God, Ethan, nobody followed us." And then her face went gray as the truth of it landed. The cabin. He didn't follow us to the cabin. He knew about the cabin. Somehow the estate records the property. It's in a family trust. If he manages the trust, then he knows every property we own. He's always known. He just never knew what it meant. And now he does, Ethan said grimly, because you drove straight to it the morning after he warned you to sell the car. Downstairs, someone knocked on the cabin door. 3 slow, heavy knocks, and a voice muffled but unmistakably calm, unmistakably warm, unmistakably. Marcus Vale said, "Victoria, sweetheart, I know you're in there. I saw the truck. Why don't you open the door and we can talk about all of this like family?" Ethan moved fast, and he moved quiet. He pulled Noah away from the window and pushed the boy toward the back of the cabin, and he grabbed the envelope and the letter and the photocopies and shoved them inside his jacket, all in the space of about 4 seconds. "Is there a back way out?" he whispered to Victoria. "A kitchen door. It opens onto the woods. There's a path down to the lake." "Marcus," she said out loud, forcing her voice steady, calling toward the front door. "I don't want to talk right now. I came up here to be alone. I'll call you tonight." "I don't think that's a good idea." Marcus's voice came back, still calm, still terrible in its calm. "I think you've been talking to the wrong people, Victoria. That mechanic. I know he's here. His truck's in the drive, and I have to tell you I'm worried about you. I'm worried he's filled your head with stories. Stories that could hurt you. Stories that could hurt the company and your father's memory and everything he built." A pause. "Let me in, sweetheart. Let me help you the way I've always helped you." Ethan had Noah by the hand and was already easing toward the kitchen, and he waved Victoria to follow, but she didn't move. She was staring at the front door, and her face had changed. The fear was still there. But underneath it, something else was rising up. Something Ethan recognized because he'd felt it himself in that garage over Henry's murdered engine. The cold, clean, bottomless anger of a person who has finally seen the truth. "You killed my father," Victoria said. The silence on the other side of the door was total. "Victoria, he wrote me a letter, Marcus." Her voice was shaking, but it did not break. "He hid it where you'd never look. He knew. Before he died, he knew, and he wrote it all down, 12 years of it, every shell company, every dollar. He knew you were stealing from him, and he knew you'd probably kill him for finding out, and he was right, wasn't he? He was right about all of it right up until the end. The only thing he got wrong was thinking I might not believe him." The door handle turned, locked. It rattled hard once. "Open the door, Victoria." The warmth was gone from Marcus's voice now all at once, like a light switched off. "You have no idea what you're holding. You have no idea what you're doing. That letter is the ranting of a sick old man who is losing his grip, and if you take it anywhere to anyone, I will bury you. And that grease monkey both, do you understand me? I have spent 30 years building the ground you stand on. I own the lawyers. I own half your board. I own the appraisers who said the car was worthless, and the coroner who said your father's heart gave out, and I will own the story of whatever happens in this cabin today. So open the door." Ethan didn't wait to hear another word. "Now," he hissed, and he grabbed Victoria's arm with his free hand, Noah's small hand clenched in his other, and he pulled them both toward the kitchen as the front door of the cabin shuddered under the first heavy kick. They went out the back into the wet green woods, running the boy stumbling, and Ethan hauling him up, Victoria right behind them with her father's letter pressed against her chest, and behind them, the front door of the cabin burst open with a crack like a gunshot, and a man's voice, not Marcus's, one of the others. Reyes shouted. They went out the back, and Ethan Carter ran into the trees with his son's hand in his, and a dead man's truth against his heart, and behind him the sound of men coming fast, and he understood with a terrible clarity that they had found the proof and lost their hiding place, and made an enemy who had just admitted out loud through a locked door to murder, and that the only thing between his boy and that man was the 2-hour head start they no longer had, and a downhill path through the woods that Marcus Vale, who knew every property the family owned, almost certainly knew too. The path went down toward the lake, and Ethan took it because down was faster than up, and because a man carrying a 9-year-old couldn't outrun 2 younger men on flat ground. Gravity was the only ally he had, so he used it half running and half sliding down the wet slope with Noah clutched against his chest. Now the boy's arms locked around his neck and Victoria a step behind him with her father's letter jammed inside her coat. "Where does this go?" Ethan gasped. "The dock. There's an old boat my father kept a—" Victoria's foot slid, and she went down hard on one knee, and Ethan grabbed her collar and hauled her back up without stopping. "There's a rowboat. It still floats. Maybe. Maybe's not good enough. It's what we've got." Behind them, up the slope, a voice called out. "Rhea's closer than Ethan wanted. I got a visual they're heading for the water." And then a second voice farther back, calm even now, even running Marcus Vale, saying, "Don't let them reach the road on the far side. That's all that matters. Don't let them off this property. Off this property." Ethan's mind seized on it even as his legs kept moving. That was the whole game to Marcus. Get them somewhere private, somewhere his. As long as they were on family land, they were 3 trespassers and a runaway rumor. The second they hit a public road, they were witnesses. "The far side of the lake," Ethan said. "Is there a road?" "A fire road. It connects to Route 26 eventually, but it's a mile around the shore. We'll never—" "We're not going around. We're going across." They broke out of the trees onto a small rotting dock, and there it was, the rowboat upside down and half swallowed by weeds, and it looked like it hadn't touched water in a decade. Ethan set Noah down. "Buddy, I need you to be brave for about 2 minutes. Can you do that?" Noah's face was white, and his lip was trembling, but he nodded because he was his father's son. "Good man." Ethan grabbed the boat and heaved it over, and the wood groaned, and a family of spiders scattered, and there were 2 oars underneath, one of them cracked. He shoved the boat off the dock into the shallows. It floated. It leaked water beating up between the boards, but it floated. "Get in. Victoria, get him in, sit low. Keep the letter dry." "What about you?" "I'm pushing us off." Ethan was already up to his knees in the cold lake, shoving the boat out, and at that exact moment, Rhea's came out of the trees onto the dock 40 feet back, and stopped, and Ethan saw the man's hand go to his waistband. "Down!" Ethan roared, and he threw himself flat over the side of the boat as it slid into deeper water, and there was no gunshot. Thank God, no gunshot, because Rhea's hesitated, because even a man who works for a killer thinks twice about firing across open water at a woman and a child in broad daylight, with a mile of shoreline and no way to know who might be watching. That hesitation was everything. Ethan grabbed the oars and pulled, and the boat lurched out onto the lake away from the dock. Away from Rhea's, out into the gray water where the men on shore could not follow, without a boat of their own. And there was no other boat. "Row," Victoria said low and fierce, one arm around Noah. "Row, Ethan, don't stop." He rowed. His shoulders screamed and the cracked oar flexed like it might snap with every pull, and the boat took on water the whole way, an inch, 2 inches sloshing around their feet. And Noah bailed with his cupped hands because there was nothing else to bail with. And behind them, Marcus Vale stood on the dock and did not shout and did not rage. He just watched. That was the worst of it, Ethan would think later. The man just stood there, hands in the pockets of his expensive coat, watching them row away with the proof. And there was no panic in him at all. Because a man like Marcus Vale did not believe he could lose. He had never lost. Losing was a thing that happened to other people, to careful old men who read files by hand, to grease-stained mechanics who didn't know their place. They reached the far shore. The boat was 3/4 full of lake by then, and it grounded on the mud and sank the last few inches. Right there, done, finished, but it had done its job. Ethan hauled Noah out and Victoria after him, and they scrambled up the bank, and there was the fire road, rutted and overgrown, but a road. "Which way?" Ethan said. "Left. Left goes down. Down goes to 26. They went left, and they ran until Noah couldn't run anymore, and then Ethan carried him, and they walked, and the sun crossed the sky, and it was almost 2 hours before a logging truck came rattling down the fire road, and the driver, a heavy-set man with a gray beard and kind eyes, took one look at the three of them, soaked to the waist. Mud-streaked a woman clutching an envelope to her chest, and a man carrying a sleeping boy, and said, "You folks look like you had a hell of a day. Get in." They didn't go home. Ethan wouldn't let them. "He knows where I live," he said in the cab of the logging truck low so the driver couldn't hear. "He knows where you live. The one place he doesn't know is any place we've never been. So we go someplace new, someplace we pay cash, and we figure out how to reach Robert Feld before Marcus figures out how to reach us." The driver dropped them at a motor lodge outside Sandy, the kind of place with a buzzing ice machine and a clerk who didn't look up from his phone, and Ethan paid cash for 2 connecting rooms under a name that wasn't his, and he sat Noah down on one of the beds and knelt in front of him. "You okay, buddy?" Noah nodded, though his eyes were huge and his hands were still cold. "You were so brave today. You know that you bailed that whole boat. We'd have sunk without you. Was that man going to hurt us?" Ethan didn't lie to his son. He never had. "Yeah," he said gently. "I think he wanted to. But he didn't. Because you and me and Victoria, we were smart, and we were fast, and we got away. And now we're going to make sure he can't ever hurt anybody again." How? By telling the truth to the right person. That's it. That's the whole thing. He's got money and lawyers and all of it, but there's one thing he can't buy, and that's what's in Victoria's coat right now. Her dad's own words. And once the right person reads them, all the money in the world won't save him. Noah thought about that. "Henry would have liked today," he said finally. "The boat part, not the scary part, the boat part." Ethan laughed, and it cracked in the middle, and he pulled his son into his arms and held on longer than the boy probably wanted. In the next room, Victoria was on the motel phone. She'd tried Robert Feld's direct line 3 times from the number she'd found and gotten voicemail 3 times. And now, at 6:15 in the evening, she finally got a receptionist, and the receptionist told her that Mr. Feld was out of the office until Monday. It was Thursday. Victoria hung up and stood very still. "Monday," she said when Ethan came in. "Robert Feld is out until Monday, 4 days." "Then we survived 4 days. You don't understand." She turned to him, and there was a new fear in her face, sharper than the woods, sharper than the boat. "I know Marcus. I've watched him work for 10 years. He doesn't panic, and he doesn't chase. He plans. And right now, tonight, he is not sitting in that cabin wondering where we went. He is on the phone. He is calling the board and the lawyers and every appraiser and coroner and cop he told me he owns, and he is building a story. And by the time we reach anybody on Monday, the story is going to already be told. And in his story, we're not the ones exposing a thief. We're the ones stealing from the estate." Ethan's stomach turned over because he knew the second she said it that she was right. "What do you mean stealing from the estate? Think about it from the outside." Victoria's voice was climbing with the horror of it. "A grief-stricken heiress, unstable since her father's death, everyone knows it. Marcus has made sure everyone knows it. He's spent 14 months telling my board I'm fragile, telling my lawyers I'm not myself, being so kind about it. And this unstable heiress suddenly takes up with a mechanic. A stranger, a man with money problems, a mortgage in default, a garage about to go under. And this mechanic fills her head with a wild conspiracy. And next thing anyone knows, the two of them have removed documents from a family property they're hiding in a motel under a false name. They won't answer their phones, Ethan. He doesn't have to prove we're criminals. He just has to make us look exactly like what a con man and a broken woman would look like. And we just spent all day making it easy for him." Ethan sat down on the edge of the bed. She was right. God help them, she was right. Everything they'd done to survive the false name, the cash, the running, the silence, every single thing that had kept them alive today was going to look from the outside like guilt. "The letter," he said. "The letter proves. The letter is a photocopy of statements and a handwritten note from a dead man. Marcus will say I forged it. or that my father wrote it in a state of dementia, which Marcus has probably already got a doctor ready to swear to. He told me through the door, he said it. He owns the coroner, he owns the appraisers. You think he doesn't own a doctor who'll say my father was losing his mind? She pressed her hands to her face. It's his word against a dead man's. And Marcus is alive, and Marcus is respectable, and Marcus has 30 years of being trusted, and I am the crazy daughter, and you are the con man, and by Monday that will be the only story anyone has heard. The room was very quiet. Noah had come to stand in the connecting doorway, listening the way he always listened, and neither of them had noticed. Then get a different story out first, Noah said. They both turned. What did you say, buddy? Noah shrugged, uncomfortable with two adults staring at him, but he pushed on because he was 9 and the logic seemed obvious to him. You said the bad man is telling everybody his story, so his story wins. So tell your story first, so yours wins. He looked between them. That's how it works at school. Whoever tells the teacher first, that's the story the teacher believes. Even if it's not true. So you gotta be first. Ethan looked at his son. And then he looked at Victoria, and he saw the exact same thought land in her eyes that had just landed in his. He's right, Ethan said slowly. We've been thinking about this wrong. We've been treating this like a secret we have to protect until Monday. But it's not a secret. It's the opposite. The only power Marcus has is that this is quiet. That it's his word against ours in a private room where he owns everybody, so we don't keep it quiet. He stood up. We make it loud. We make it so loud that it doesn't matter who he owns because it's not in a private room anymore. It's in front of everybody. How? Victoria said. You're a CEO. You know people. Not Marcus's people, your people. Press, reporters. Somebody who'd give their right arm for a story about a stolen fortune and a murdered. He caught himself, glanced at Noah, softened it. A story this big. If we can't reach the Justice Department till Monday. Fine. But there's more than one way to tell the truth to the right person. Sometimes the right person is everybody. Victoria was shaking her head, but not in refusal, in the dawning, dizzy way of a person recalculating everything. There's a reporter, she said. Financial investigative desk. She's been sniffing around my father's foundation for 2 years, trying to get someone to talk to her. And Marcus had legal shut her down every time. Sarah Chen. If I called Sarah Chen and handed her 12 years of shell companies and a letter from a dead man naming his own murderer. Victoria stopped. She'd never be able to run it that fast. Papers take weeks, lawyers, fact-checking. It wouldn't be out by Monday either. It wouldn't have to run, Ethan said. It just has to exist. The second a respected reporter has that letter, the second Sarah Chen knows what you know. Marcus can't make you disappear into a nice quiet story about a crazy heiress. Because if anything happens to you now, there's a reporter holding a letter that names him. He's smart, Victoria. You keep telling me how smart he is. A smart man doesn't kill the source after a reporter's already got the file. It doesn't protect him anymore. It hangs him. Victoria stared at him. You want to use ourselves as insurance. I want us to still be alive on Monday, Ethan said. And I want Marcus Vale to spend the whole weekend knowing that the box he thought he'd nailed shut just got opened, and he can't tell how far it's spread. Let him be the one who can't sleep for a change. Victoria picked up the motel phone. Her hand hovered over it. Once I make this call, she said quietly, there's no going back. Right now, Marcus still thinks this is contained. He thinks it's 3 people in the woods and a stack of paper. The second I bring in the press, I've declared war on the man who runs half my father's world, and I've done it with no proof but a photocopy and a letter he'll swear is fake. You already declared war, Ethan said gently. You declared it through a cabin door this morning when you told him you knew he killed your father. There's no version of this where you go back to being the quiet, grieving daughter he could manage. That woman's gone. She's been gone since you knelt down by that fireplace. He met her eyes. The only question now is whether you fight him quiet where he wins or loud where you've got a chance. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Then she dialed. Tig. Sarah Chen picked up on the second ring, and Ethan could only hear Victoria's half of it, but he could see the reporter's disbelief traveling down the line and then slowly curdling into something hungry. "It's Victoria Hayes," Victoria said. "Yes, that Victoria Hayes. I know you've been trying to reach me for 2 years. I know my lawyers stonewalled you. I know why now. Sarah, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen, and then I need you to decide very quickly whether you're the kind of reporter I think you are." A pause. "I have documents. 12 years of them. And I have a letter from my father in his own hand, written 2 days before he died, telling me who did it and why." No, not now. Not over the phone. I need you somewhere public, somewhere with people tomorrow morning. And I need you to bring a lawyer you trust, and a way to make copies, because the moment I hand this to you, both, our lives change. Another pause longer. "Because I think the man who stole it also killed my father to keep it quiet. And I think if I don't get it in front of someone by Monday, I might not make it to Monday. Is that clear enough for you?" Whatever Sarah Chen said back, it made Victoria close her eyes and exhale like something heavy had come off her chest. "Thank you," Victoria said. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. I'll text you where." She hung up. "She's in," Victoria said. "She's terrified and she's thrilled and she's in. Tomorrow morning, public place, she brings a media lawyer and a scanner. We give her everything, copies of everything. And then it exists in more than one place in more than one pair of hands, and Marcus can't put it back in the box." For the first time since the woods, Ethan felt something in his chest that wasn't dread. It wasn't quite hope. But it was the thing that comes right before hope, the thing that lets you keep going long enough for hope to catch up. "Then we made it," he said. "We just have to get to 9 a.m. Which was when the motel room phone rang. All three of them froze. Nobody had this number. Nobody knew they were here. Ethan had paid cash under a false name at a place chosen at random off a fire road. There was no possible way that anyone could be calling this room. The phone rang again, shrill in the little room. "Don't answer it," Victoria whispered. But Ethan was already staring at it, and a cold understanding was creeping up his spine, because there was exactly one way anybody could be calling this room, and it meant everything they thought they knew about their head start was wrong. He picked up the phone. "Hello, Ethan," said Marcus Vale. The voice was calm, warm even. The voice of a man who had all the time in the world. "How—" Ethan's mouth had gone dry. "How did you get this number?" "Oh, it wasn't hard. It's really not hard when you have the resources I have to find a man traveling with a 9-year-old boy and a woman worth $400 million. You paid cash, that was clever, I'll give you that. But you used your own truck to reach the fire road, and there aren't many places a wet, exhausted family goes to ground within 30 miles of Trillium Lake. And I have people who do nothing but this. I've had people who do nothing but this for a very long time, Ethan. Longer than you've been alive in this business." A soft sound, almost a chuckle. "You've had a very busy day. The lake, the logging truck. That was resourceful, I mean that sincerely. And now let me guess. A phone call to a reporter." Ethan's blood turned to ice. "You bugged her," Victoria breathed, seeing his face. "Or my phone, or—" "I know what you're going to do, because I know what I would do," Marcus went on pleasantly. "And Victoria and I think a great deal alike, whatever she may believe about me right now. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to listen very carefully, because I'm only going to make this offer once, and it's a good one, better than you deserve." He paused. "There's a boy in that room. Ethan's boy. Noah, isn't it?" Ethan's whole body went rigid. "Don't," he said very low. "You don't say his name. You don't ever say his name." "I'm not threatening him," Marcus said, and the awful thing was that he sounded almost hurt. "God, no. I'm not a monster, whatever that letter says. I'm a businessman. I'm calling because I want that boy to grow up with a father. And right now, Ethan, you are on a path that ends with you in prison for kidnapping and fraud or worse, and that little boy raised by strangers, and for what? For a woman who mocked you in front of 40 people 3 days ago? For a dead man you met 20 years ago? You have a chance right now tonight to walk away. Take your son. Go home. Forget the lake. Forget the letter. Forget all of it. Tomorrow morning, a very generous deposit appears in your account, enough to save your garage and your house, and put that boy through college. And none of this ever happened. You go back to your small good life, and your son keeps his father. A beat. Or you keep going, and I promise you, Ethan, I will take everything. Not just the case. Everything. Do you understand what I'm offering you? I'm offering you your son's whole future. All you have to do is be the one thing you've spent your whole life refusing to be. Be reasonable. Be a man with a price. And there it was. Ethan stood in that cheap motel room with the phone against his ear, and his son watching him from the connecting doorway with those huge, trusting eyes. And Marcus Vale had reached across 2 counties and 30 years of quiet murder to hand him the exact bargain that every powerful man eventually offers every honest one. Your integrity or your child. Your soul or your safety. Be a man who tells the truth, or be a man with a price. And for one long, terrible second, Ethan thought about the mortgage 2 months behind. He thought about the garage lease and the market adjustment. He thought about Noah's shoes and college, and the small good life Marcus had described so precisely, so cruelly, because it was exactly the life Ethan had been failing to hold together, and here was a man offering to hand it back whole. He looked at his son, and Noah, who couldn't hear Marcus, who only saw his father's face going pale, and still took a step into the room and said in a small voice, "Dad, is it the bad man? Are you doing the sad hands thing?" And Ethan looked down at his own free hand and saw that yes, without noticing, he had begun to wring it the way he wrung out a rag, the way he did when a rich person had beaten him down. He stopped. He made his hand into a fist, and then he let it open flat and steady, and he lifted his eyes. And when he spoke into the phone, his voice was calm as still water. "Henry Osgood pulled me out of a bad life when I was 17, Ethan said. "You want to know what he told me? He told me you don't tell the truth because somebody earned it. You tell the truth because of who you decide to be. And the day you start putting a price on it, you're not that man anymore. You're just another guy who can be bought." He looked at his son. "I've got a boy watching me right now, Marcus. And someday he's going to be a man. And I'd rather leave him a father who lost everything telling the truth than a father who kept the garage by helping a murderer sleep at night. So here's my answer. Here's the only answer you're ever going to get from me." He paused. "Watch a man's hands," Ethan said softly. Not his smile. Victoria's father wrote that. It was the last thing he ever taught her. And I just watched yours, Marcus. All the way down. And he hung up. The room was silent. Victoria was staring at him with something on her face he'd never seen from her, from anyone, a kind of naked astonishment, as if he had done something she hadn't known a person could do. "He knows where we are," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "He knows the reporter. He knows all of it. He's coming, Ethan, tonight. He has to. He can't let us reach the morning now, not after that." "I know," Ethan said. "Then what do we do?" Ethan looked at the clock on the nightstand. It was 8:52 in the evening. 9 a.m. and Sarah Chen and the whole rest of their lives were 12 hours away, and Marcus Vale knew exactly where they were, and there was no logging truck coming this time, and no lake to put between them. He picked up the phone again. But not to call Sarah Chen. Not the Justice Department. Not anyone Marcus would expect. "Buddy," he said to Noah, dialing. "You remember what I told you about being first? About whoever tells the story first, that's the story that wins." Noah nodded. "You were right," Ethan said. "So we're not waiting till 9 a.m. We're not waiting for anything." He put the phone to his ear, and it began to ring, and he looked at Victoria, and for the first time all day, he smiled. and it was the same smile he'd worn walking into her garage 3 days ago, the smile of a man who already knew what was hiding inside the machine. "We're telling it right now. Tonight. All of it. Everywhere at once. And by the time Marcus Vale gets to this motel, there's going to be nothing left to bury because the whole world's already going to be watching." The person Ethan called was Walter Briggs, the old bootlegger with the heart condition and the Rolodex that reached into every rich garage in the Pacific Northwest, the man who'd given Victoria Ethan's name in the first place. And when Walter answered on the fourth ring, wheezing half asleep, Ethan didn't waste a second on hello. "Walter, it's Ethan Carter. I need you to listen, and I need you not to ask questions until I'm done." "Ethan, it's damn near 9 o'clock, son. What? You know everybody, Walter. You told Victoria Hayes I could fix her Porsche, which means you know her circle, and you've been in this valley 60 years, which means you know who's clean and who's dirty. So I need one name from you tonight, and I need it to be somebody Marcus Vale doesn't own." There was a silence on the line. When Walter spoke again, the sleep was gone from his voice. "Marcus Vale," Walter repeated slowly. "You're mixed up with Marcus Vale. I'm asking if you know a cop, a real one. State federal doesn't matter as long as he's not on Vale's payroll and he's not scared of him." Another silence. Longer. "You in trouble, son?" "Walter, I've got a 9-year-old boy in a motel room and a man coming to kill all 3 of us before morning to keep a murder quiet. That's the kind of trouble I'm in, so please, a name." Ethan heard the old man breathing. "There's a fella," Walter said finally. "State Police Criminal Investigations Division. Name of Dale Okafor. Arrested my own nephew 8 years back and I hated his guts for it, and then I found out my nephew did the thing, so I stopped hating his guts. Okafor can't be bought. I know because a man tried in front of me and Okafor put him in a car." A pause. "But Ethan, a man like Vale, you don't take him down with one honest cop. He's too big. He'll have that cop tied up in jurisdiction and lawyers before sunup." "I'm not trying to take him down with one cop," Ethan said. "I'm trying to survive the night. The cop is so somebody official knows where we are and why. So that if Marcus comes, he's not walking into a quiet motel room, he's walking into a scene the state police already have their eyes on. You said it yourself, Walter. A man doesn't kill the witnesses after somebody's already watching. It stops protecting him." "You've thought about this." "I've had a long day to think about it. Give me Okafor's number." Walter gave it to him. And then the old man added in a voice that had gone rough, "Ethan, that mechanic thing. Fixing dead machines nobody else can. Henry Osgood's boy." A breath. "Henry was my friend. Did you know that 50 years? When he died, I figured that was the end of men like him. And here you are." Walter cleared his throat, embarrassed by his own sentiment. "You do right by his memory tonight, son. You hear me?" "I hear you, Walter." "Then go, and call me when it's done, so an old man knows you're breathing." It was 9:14 when Ethan called Dale Okafor, and to his everlasting relief, Okafor answered, and Okafor listened, and Okafor did not laugh. It took 11 minutes to lay it out. The Porsche, Henry's engine, the compartment, the letter under the floorboard. Marcus Vale through the cabin door admitting it all. The chase, the lake, the motel, the phone call 20 minutes ago, and the offer and the refusal. When Ethan finished, there was a pause. "You have the letter," Okafor said. "Physically, in the room with you right now." The original, and photocopies of 12 years of account statements. Handwritten note from Gerald Hayes dated 2 days before his death naming Marcus Vale. "And Vale knows where you are. He called the room. He knows the reporter we contacted. He knows all of it." Okafor was quiet for a moment, and Ethan could hear him doing the math. The same math they'd all been doing, the terrible arithmetic of a man who owned coroners and appraisers and cops. "Here's the truth, Mr. Carter," Okafor said finally, and his voice was flat and honest in a way that Ethan trusted instantly. "If half of what you're telling me is real, then Marcus Vale is the biggest fish I've ever had a shot at, and I've been trying to get a look at his books for 6 years, and been shut down by people above me every single time. So part of me wants to drive up there right now with everything I've got. A pause. And part of me knows that the second I move officially, it goes into a system that Vale has money and friends inside of, and by the time I get a warrant, that letter could be lost in evidence, and you could be dead in a motel that gets ruled a robbery gone wrong. You understand what I'm saying? Going through the front door with this might be the thing that gets you killed, because it warns him, and it gives him time, and time is the only thing a man like that needs. Ethan's chest tightened. Then what do? We don't go through the front door, Okafor said. You already had the right idea, and you didn't even know it. You said you called a reporter. You said you were going to make it loud. That's exactly right. My badge protects you a little, but the whole world watching protects you completely. So here's what we're going to do, and we're going to do it in the next hour before Vale can reach you. And Dale Okafor told him. At 9:40, Victoria Hayes sat down in front of Ethan's cracked phone, propped against a stack of motel pillows, and she recorded a video. She didn't put on makeup. She didn't fix her hair still stiff with lake water. She sat there in a borrowed motel bathrobe, with mud still under her fingernails, and her father's letter in her hands, and she looked into the little camera lens, and she told the truth. She said her name. She said who her father was. She said he had died 14 months ago of what everyone was told was a heart attack, and that she had believed it, because grief makes you want to believe the simple thing. And then she read the letter. All of it. Her father's voice coming out of her mouth, the love and the apology and the accusation, the shell companies, the 12 years, the names. Watch a man's hands, sweetheart, not his smile. Her voice broke on that line, and she didn't edit it out because Okafor had told her not to edit anything, that the breaks and the tears were the thing no lawyer could fake and no appraiser could buy. She held up the photocopies to the camera one page at a time, slow enough to read. Account numbers. Transfer dates. 12 years of a fortune bleeding out through companies that didn't make anything and didn't sell anything and existed only to move money into the dark. And then she said the last part, the part that was for Marcus, and the part that was the whole point. If you're watching this, she said, looking straight into the lens, then you already know who you are. And I want you to understand what's just happened. This video is being sent tonight right now to a reporter named Sarah Chen, and to investigator Dale Okafor of the state police, and to my father's attorney of record, and to 3 members of my board who my father trusted, and you don't control. It's being uploaded to servers you can't reach and given to people you can't buy. So there's no room to break into anymore, Marcus. There's no letter to lose in evidence. There's no motel robbery you can arrange. The box is open. It's been open for, she glanced off camera at Ethan, who nodded, for about 4 minutes now. And it's never closing again. My father spent 12 years not looking at your hands. I've spent 14 months not looking at them either. I'm looking now. Everybody's about to be looking now. She stopped recording. The room was silent, except for the buzz of the ice machine down the walkway and Noah's soft breathing from the next bed, where the boy had finally mercifully fallen asleep. Send it, Ethan said. Victoria's thumb hovered over the screen. You understand, she said quietly, not looking up, that the second I send this, my whole life is over. The company, my name, whatever's left of my privacy. Even if we win, especially if we win, I become the woman whose father was murdered by the man who raised her family's fortune. I'll be that story until the day I die. There's no going back to being anybody else. There was never going back, Ethan said gently. There hasn't been since the fireplace. You know that. He crouched down beside her so they were eye to eye. But you're not doing this to go back. You're doing it because a good man wrote his daughter a letter with his own hand, knowing it might get him killed, because he trusted that if it came to it, she'd be brave enough to read it out loud. That's what he thought of you, Victoria, even scared, even at the end. He thought you were the kind of person who'd send this. Victoria closed her eyes. Then she pressed send. At 10:20, Marcus Vale called the motel room one last time. Ethan let it ring twice before he answered. Marcus, you sent something. The warmth was gone from the voice now. Completely gone. Underneath it was a thing Ethan had never heard in it before, and it took him a second to recognize it, because it was so out of place coming from Marcus Vale. It was fear. "I don't know what you mean," Ethan said. "Don't. My people flagged a large upload from that motel's network 11 minutes ago. Multiple recipients. You sent something, and I want to know what, and I want to know to who, and I am prepared to be extremely generous." "It's a video," Ethan said. Victoria reading her father's letter, holding up the statements, naming you. It's already with a reporter, a state investigator, an attorney, and 3 of her board members. And Marcus? Ethan let it land. It's already been watched. By people who aren't in this room. So whatever you were driving up here to do tonight, there's not a lot of point to it anymore. You can't unsend it. You can't buy back a thing that's already in 4 different inboxes. You spent 30 years being the only one who knew where the bodies were. As of 11 minutes ago, you're not. The silence on the line was the longest one yet. And when Marcus spoke again, his voice had changed a 3rd time. Not warm, not afraid, but something colder and older and more dangerous than either the voice of a cornered animal that has stopped pretending to be tame. "You have no idea what you've done," Marcus said quietly. "You think you've won because you made noise, but noise fades, Ethan. Reporters get called off. Investigators get reassigned. Board members get bought or scared or simply outlasted. I have survived storms that would have flattened 100 men like you, and I have survived them by being patient and by remembering one thing that a mechanic could never understand." A pause. "Everyone has a breaking point. Everyone. And I have all the time in the world to find yours. You have a garage, a house with a mortgage, a boy who has to go to school every single morning, the same route, the same time. You've made me visible tonight, I'll grant you that. But visible men have destroyed people quietly for as long as there have been visible men. I don't need to come to your motel. I never did. I just needed you to think I would so you'd panic and expose yourself. And you did. So thank you, Ethan. You've handed me a fight I'll enjoy winning slowly. And it was meant to break him." Ethan understood that. It was a man who'd lost the first move, reaching for the only weapon he had left, which was patience and menace, and the long, cruel horizon of a rich man's grudge. But Ethan had spent his whole life around machines, and he'd learned to hear the difference between an engine that was running and an engine that was faking it. And under Marcus Vale's cold, patient threat, Ethan heard the other thing. The thing Marcus couldn't hide because it was mechanical, because it was true. He heard a man who had just discovered he was no longer in control of his own story. "You keep talking about time, Marcus," Ethan said. "All the time in the world, patient, slow. I'll tell you what my mentor told me about time since you never got to meet him, the man whose engine you gutted to hide your crime. Henry Osgood. He used to say, the truth doesn't disappear, it waits." Ethan looked over at Noah, asleep, safe breathing. "You've had 14 months, Marcus. 14 months where nobody was looking, where you owned the coroner and the appraisers and the story, and you couldn't sleep, could you? You told Victoria to sell the car for parts. Some things are worth more gone than kept. You've been trying to make one broken engine disappear for over a year, and you couldn't do it because that machine kept telling the truth even with your fake part jammed inside it. And now you want me to believe you've got all the time in the world." Ethan shook his head, though Marcus couldn't see it. "You're out of time. You ran out of it 11 minutes ago. You just haven't finished feeling it yet." There was a click. Marcus Vale had hung up. Dale Okafor and 2 state police cruisers arrived at the motel at 11:52 that night, and they stayed until morning parked in the lot, with their lights off. 3 officers rotating watch because Okafor had said he wasn't going to be the man who let a witness die on a technicality. Nobody came. Whatever Marcus had planned for that motel room, the video had killed it as surely as it killed his defense, and the night passed slow and cold, and in the end, uneventful. 3 people and a sleeping boy under the watch of an honest cop waiting for a dawn that a day ago none of them had been sure they'd see. At 6:30 in the morning, Sarah Chen called. She'd been up all night with 2 lawyers and an editor. The story was going to run. Not the whole thing. Not yet. The legal review would take days for the full piece. But a first report tonight confirming that Victoria Hayes had turned over documents to state investigators alleging financial crimes at the Hayes Foundation and that a criminal investigation was now active. It was enough. It was a shot fired that everyone would hear. At 9:15, Okafor's people executed a search warrant on Marcus Vale's office and home, simultaneously moving fast before Vale's lawyers could paper it to death. Because now there was a record. Now there was a reporter. Now there was a video that 4 separate people could testify they'd received before any warrant existed, which meant Vale couldn't claim it was fabricated after the fact. And what they found once they had the account records and knew where to look was so much worse than anyone had imagined. Because the Porsche had never been the crime. The Porsche was just where Gerald Hayes had hidden the first thread. When investigators pulled that thread, the whole tapestry came apart. 12 years. Gerald's letter had said, but it was longer than 12 years. It went back nearly 20 back, to before Victoria was old enough to know what a foundation was, a slow, steady bleed disguised as management fees and consulting arrangements and charitable disbursements to organizations that turned out to be Marcus Vale wearing different masks. The number when they finally had it was not millions. It was hundreds of millions. Marcus Vale had been quietly dismantling the Hayes fortune for 2 decades, one careful, invisible piece at a time, and Gerald Hayes had trusted him the whole way, because Gerald's own father had trusted him, and that trust had been the tool Marcus used to rob 3 generations of a single family. And when Gerald finally caught it, an old man who couldn't sleep reading paper files by hand, Marcus had done the one thing left to do to keep it buried. The exhumation was ordered on a Wednesday. The second autopsy came back 3 weeks later. Gerald Hayes had not died of a heart attack. He'd died of a heart attack induced by a compound that mimicked a thing that a very rich and very patient man could obtain administered by someone with access to his home, his food, his life. Someone he trusted completely. Someone who'd been kind and steady at the funeral, who'd said, "Let me carry this for you, Victoria." Victoria read the autopsy report in Okafor's office, with Ethan sitting beside her, and she did not cry, and that was somehow worse than crying. She just set the paper down very carefully, and she looked at the wall for a long time, and finally, she said in a voice scraped down to nothing, "He was right. My father was right about everything. Right up to the second he died, he was the only one in that whole house who saw the truth. And I went back to my meeting." She turned to Ethan. "I keep waiting for the part where knowing makes it hurt less. When does that part come?" Ethan didn't lie to her the same way he never lied to his son. "It doesn't," he said gently. "Knowing doesn't make it hurt less. It just makes it hurt true, and true hurt you can carry. It's the other kind that breaks people. The doubt, the not knowing, the being told you're crazy for seeing what's right in front of you. You lived in that for 14 months. This..." He touched the edge of the report. "This is terrible, but it's real. And real, you can survive." Marcus Vale was arrested on a Thursday morning, and he did not go quietly, but he did not go the way anyone expected either. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He hired the best defense in the state, and he settled in for exactly the kind of long, patient, grinding war he'd promised Ethan over a motel phone, because that was the only battlefield Marcus Vale had ever known how to win, on the slow one, the expensive one, the one that outlasts everyone. But it turned out that money is only patient when the man spending it is free. And once the murder charge landed on top of the fraud, once a second autopsy proved a father had been poisoned by the man he trusted most, no judge in the state was going to let Marcus Vale post bail and wait it out in comfort. He waited in a cell. And the coroner he'd owned, faced with a perjury charge, remembered his conscience. And the appraisers, faced with the same, remembered theirs. And one by one, over the following months, the people Marcus Vale had spent 30 years buying discovered that his protection was worth exactly as much as his freedom, which was nothing. And they turned all of them, because that is what bought men do the moment the buying stops. The empire of quiet that Marcus had built over 3 decades came apart in a single loud season, and the thing that started it, the first crack, the loose thread, The seam that was wrong was a broken Porsche in a rich woman's garage that a grease-stained mechanic had opened up and listened to when everyone else was reading screens. It was 2 months later, on an ordinary gray Oregon afternoon, that Victoria Hayes drove out to Carter's garage for the first time. Not the mansion, not a boardroom. Ethan's actual garage, the small one, the one with the peeling sign and the check engine light he'd finally gotten around to fixing on his own truck. She pulled up in a plain sedan. She'd sold most of the cars. She'd sell most of everything before it was done. The estate was a decade of litigation waiting to happen. And she found Ethan under a tractor, and Noah doing homework on an overturned bucket. And she stood in the doorway of that humble place, and for a moment didn't seem to know how to come in. "The rich lady," Noah announced, delighted, looking up from his math. "Hey, Noah." Victoria smiled at him, and it was an easy smile now, a real one, the kind Ethan had watched grow into her face over the hardest 2 months of both their lives. "How's the airplane phase?" "Over. Now it's engines. Dad's teaching me." Noah held up a greasy hand proudly. "I did a spark plug." Ethan slid out from under the tractor, wiping his hands on the eternal rag, and stood, and for a second neither of them said anything, because everything they'd been through together sat in the air between them, too big to put into words, and too honest to ignore. "I wanted to tell you in person," Victoria said finally. "Marcus took a plea this morning. His lawyers finally understood that with the second autopsy, a jury was going to bury him, and he'd rather have a number he can count down than a verdict he can't. Life with the possibility of parole in 30 years. He'll be 85. She said it flatly, without triumph. He won't ever be free again. It's over. Or the part that can be over is over. Ethan let out a long breath he felt like he'd been holding for 2 months. "How do you feel?" Victoria considered the question honestly, which was a thing she'd learned to do, he thought, somewhere in all of this. "Not the way I thought I would," she said. "I thought there'd be, I don't know, relief, victory, something clean, but it's not clean. My father's still gone. 30 years of it, Ethan. My grandfather trusted him. My father trusted him. I trusted him. 3 generations, and he was robbing us the whole time and smiling and coming to Christmas dinner." She shook her head. "The money doesn't even matter. It's the years. He stole years of my father's trust, and my father died still not fully believing the man he loved could do it. That's the part I can't—" She stopped, steadied. "But you asked how I feel. And the honest answer is, I feel like I can finally look at my own hands again. That's something. That's more than I had 2 months ago." Noah, who had been listening the way he always listened, said quietly, "Dad says the truth doesn't make it stop hurting. It just makes it hurt true." Victoria looked at the boy, and then at Ethan. "Your father's a wise man," she said. "My father can't fix his own truck till last month," Noah said. "But he's pretty smart about other stuff." And Victoria Hayes laughed a full, surprised, unguarded laugh in a peeling paint garage that smelled of oil and coffee and second chances. The laugh of a woman who 2 months ago had not been sure she remembered how. And Ethan Carter stood there and watched her laugh and felt something in his own chest. He hadn't let himself feel in a very long time, since before a wife had died and a life had gotten small and careful and scared. But he didn't name it. Not yet. It wasn't time yet. There was still one thing left to do, and it was waiting out in the yard under a tarp on a flatbed trailer that Victoria had towed all the way from the mansion without telling him what was on it. "Come outside," she said. "There's something I need you to see. Something I've been holding on to until it was finished." Until he was finished. She looked at him, and her eyes were bright. "My father's car, Ethan. The Porsche. It's time somebody made it run again." Ethan pulled the tarp back, and there it was. The silver-blue Porsche. Henry Osgood's last masterpiece. Gerald Hayes's hidden safe. The machine that had started all of it. It looked exactly as it had the first day he'd seen it in that airport hangar garage. Beautiful and silent and dead. But everything around it was different now. The man who'd killed it was in a cell. The man who'd hidden the truth inside it was avenged. And the mechanic standing in front of it was no longer a stranger a rich woman had laughed at. He was the only person alive who could finish what Henry started. I couldn't sell it, Victoria said, standing beside him in the yard. The lawyers told me to. Part of the estate, liquidate everything, simplify. And I almost did. And then I realized I'd be doing exactly what Marcus wanted. Some things are worth more gone than kept. Her jaw tightened around the word she'd never forget. No. Some things are worth more kept. This one most of all. She turned to him. My father hid the truth in this car because he trusted the machine more than he trusted the people around him. And he was right to. So I want it to run again, Ethan. Not for a museum. Not for a collector. I want to hear it. The way he heard it. Before all of it went wrong. Ethan ran his hand along the fender, and something moved in his chest, old and deep. You know it won't be easy, he said. Marcus took the original part. The real one. The one your father hid the proof inside. It's gone. It's evidence now. And even if I got it back, it'd be worthless as a component. He gutted the compartment. To make this run right, run true. The way Henry built it, I'd have to fabricate the original piece from scratch, by hand. The way Henry taught me. There's maybe a dozen men in the country who could do it. He paused. And I don't have Henry's notes, his specs. When he died, all of that scattered. So even I'd be working from memory. From what a 17-year-old kid remembered holding a light 20 years ago. Can you do it? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he said honestly. I'd have to try things, fail, try again. It could take weeks, months. And I've got a garage to run and a boy to raise, and I can't. He stopped because Victoria was already shaking her head. I'm not asking you to do it for free, she said. And I'm not asking you to do it in the cracks of your life. I'm asking you to do it right with time and money and whatever you need because it matters, Ethan. And because... She hesitated, and this was hard for her. He could see this woman who'd spent her whole life not needing anyone. Because I think you're the only one who should. Henry built it. You held the light. It should be your hands that bring it back. It's the closest thing to justice that machine will ever get. Ethan looked at the car, and then at his son, who'd wandered out to the yard and was staring at the Porsche with his mouth open, because a 9-year-old who'd just discovered engines had never in his life seen a machine this beautiful. Dad, Noah breathed. Is that the one? The one somebody hurt on purpose? That's the one, buddy. Are you gonna fix it? And Ethan Carter, who had spent 14 months of another man's grief and 2 months of his own fear, getting to this exact moment, looked from the car to the boy to the woman, and he made his decision the way he'd made every decision that mattered in his life. Not because it was easy, but because of who he'd decided to be. Yeah, he said. I think I am. It took 4 months. 4 months of Ethan out in the garage until midnight, of failed castings and wrong tolerances of pieces that looked perfect and ran wrong, of the specific maddening work of trying to reproduce genius from memory. He made a component that fit and didn't run. He made one that ran and didn't fit. He drove to a foundry in Portland and stood over a man's shoulder for 3 days, getting a single metal pour right. And every night, Noah did his homework on the overturned bucket beside him and asked questions and learned. And somewhere in those 4 months, the boy stopped being a kid who liked engines and started being a kid who understood them the way Ethan had at his age, the way Henry must have seen in Ethan all those years ago. Victoria came often, not as a client. She'd sit on a stool in the garage in jeans and hand Ethan tools she was slowly learning the names of, and she'd talk. And over those 4 months, Ethan watched the ice she'd spent 34 years building around herself go out the way ice goes out on a lake in spring. Not all at once, but steadily, until one day you look and the water's just moving again like it always should have been. She told him things in that garage she'd never told anyone. About a father who worked too much and loved her clumsily and never once said the words until he wrote them in a letter she found under a floorboard. About being a woman in rooms full of men who'd decided her worth before she opened her mouth. About the exhausting armor of always being the hardest person in the room, and how tired she was, how bone-tired of being the woman nobody could touch. You know what the worst part of the whole thing was? She said one night near the end, watching Ethan file a piece of metal down to a tolerance he could feel more than measure. It wasn't finding out about Marcus. It was finding out about myself. That I'd become exactly the kind of person my father was warning me about. Someone who looked at what people owned instead of what they were. I looked at you that first day, and I saw grease and an old truck, and I filed you under nothing. I mocked you. In front of 40 people. Offered to marry you as a joke, because the idea of you being worth marrying was the funniest thing I could imagine. She shook her head, ashamed. And you were the only honest man in 100 miles. My father would have seen it in 5 seconds. It took me almost dying in a rowboat. Ethan didn't stop filing. You saw it eventually, he said. That's more than most people manage. Most people go their whole lives filing folks under nothing and never once look again. He blew metal dust off the piece and held it up to the light. The measure of a person isn't whether they get it wrong the first time, Victoria. Everybody gets it wrong the first time. The measure is whether they can look again. You looked again. That's the whole thing right there. That's everything. She was quiet for a moment. My father said something like that in the letter, she said softly. That he'd never looked at Marcus's hands, only his smile. That's what got him killed, not looking again. She met Ethan's eyes across the garage. You've spent this whole time teaching my father's daughter the lesson that would have saved his life. You know that. Watch the hands. Look again. See what someone is, not what they own. Her voice caught. I think he'd have liked you. My father. I think he'd have liked you more than almost anyone he ever met. I'd have liked to hold the light for one of his cars, Ethan said. That would have been enough. They finished it on a Saturday. Ethan had told Victoria to come at noon, and to bring nothing, and to expect nothing, because he wasn't certain even then that it would run. The component was in. It fit. It looked right, looked the way Henry's work looked, that indefinable quality of a thing made by a master. But he'd learned the hard way over 4 months that looking right and running right were two different things, and he wasn't going to promise her a resurrection he couldn't deliver. Victoria arrived at noon. Walter Briggs came too. Ethan had called him because the old man had been Henry's friend for 50 years, and it seemed wrong to start that engine without one person present who'd known the man who built it. Walter shuffled in on his cane, wheezing, and stood looking at the Porsche for a long moment, and then he took off his hat. Actually took off his hat, the way men of his generation did, at funerals and in churches. Well, I'll be damned, Walter said quietly. Henry's last one. I never thought I'd see it whole again. He looked at Ethan. He'd be proud, son. You know that. He picked you off the street when you were nothing but trouble and a talent, and everybody told him he was a fool, and here you are finishing the last thing he ever made. He'd be so damn proud he wouldn't know what to do with himself. Walter's eyes were wet. Now quit stalling and start the thing before my heart gives out from the suspense. Noah climbed into the driver's seat, because Ethan had promised him he could, and Ethan leaned in over the open engine one last time, and Victoria stood with her hands pressed together against her mouth, and Walter gripped his cane, and for a moment the whole garage held its breath. Turn the key, buddy, Ethan said. Gentle, like I showed you. Noah turned the key. The engine cranked. Once, twice, a cough, a hesitation. And Ethan's heart dropped because he knew that sound. That was the sound of 4 months of work not being enough. That was the sound of a piece that fit and wouldn't. And then it caught. It caught, and it turned over, and it ran, and not just ran, but ran the way an air-cooled Porsche built by a master runs that specific mechanical music, deep and even and alive, a sound like nothing else on earth. The sound of hundreds of parts made by human hands, all agreeing to work together, all telling the truth at once. It filled the little garage. It rattled the peeling sign. And it was unmistakably the same sound that had once revealed a hidden crime, the engine of a car, that a father had trusted with a secret he couldn't trust to any living person, running now whole and honest and free for the first time in over a year. Noah whooped. Walter Briggs put his hat back on and wiped his face with the back of his hand and pretended it was the dust. And Victoria Hayes stood in the middle of that humble garage, with her father's car running in front of her. And she did not hold it in this time. She cried the way a person cries when something that has been broken for a very long time is finally impossibly made right. Great, heaving sobs that shook her whole body, and she didn't turn away, and she didn't apologize. And Ethan crossed the garage and stood next to her, and didn't try to stop it, because some crying isn't sadness. Some crying is the sound of a soul finally setting down a weight it's carried too far. "He's here," Victoria said through the tears over the sound of the engine. "That's Ethan, that's him. That's my father. That's the last thing he loved. You brought it back. You brought him back." She grabbed Ethan's arm and held it hard. "I spent 14 months thinking the last thing my father left me was a broken engine and a lie. And it wasn't. It was this. It was the truth running if I'd only known how to listen. And you knew how to listen. You knew from the second you opened that engine cover at my stupid party. Everyone in that room was laughing at you, and you were the only one in the world who could hear what my father was trying to say." Ethan let the engine run a while longer. Then he reached in gently and shut it off, and the silence that followed was the good kind, the kind that comes after a thing is completed. "He built a car that it could keep a secret," Ethan said quietly, "and when the time came it kept it. And when the time came for the truth, it told it. That's not me, Victoria. That's Henry. That's your father. I just held the light. Same as I did when I was 17. He looked at the car. "Some jobs, that's all you can do. You hold the light and you let the truth run itself." The story got out of course. All of it. Sarah Chen's full investigation ran that spring, a 3-part series that won awards and that Victoria read only once and never again. The trial that would have happened became a plea that didn't need one. And somewhere in all of it, the smaller story got out too. The part the awards didn't mention, the part about a struggling mechanic in a small Oregon town who'd looked at an impossible engine that a dozen experts had given up on, and heard something none of them could hear, and refused to be bought when a killer offered him his son's whole future in exchange for his silence. That story traveled further than the crime did. People are like that. They'll read about a stolen fortune once and forget it, but they'll pass the story of an honest man from mouth to mouth for years. Carter's garage got calls from all over the country. Collectors, restorers, men with impossible machines and impossible money, who'd heard there was a fellow up in Oregon who could bring dead things back to life, who worked with his hands and his ears, and something the diagnostic machines couldn't measure. Ethan turned most of them down. He didn't want to be famous. He wanted to raise his son and run his small garage and sleep at night, and he was doing all three, and the mortgage was current now, and the lease was renewed, and Noah had new shoes and a father who'd shown him at 9 years old exactly what a man was worth when nobody was watching. Victoria offered him things. A position with the foundation restoring historical cars, a salary that would have ended his money worries for the rest of his life. He thought about it, and he thanked her, and he turned it down because it wasn't his. His garage was his. His son was his. The small good life that Marcus Vail had tried to use as a weapon against him turned out to be the very thing that had made him unbreakable. A man with something real to protect is a man who can't be bought because the thing he'd have to sell is the only thing he actually wants. But he and Victoria didn't stop. Whatever had grown in that garage over 4 months of failed castings and late-night talk, it didn't end when the engine ran. She kept coming. Noah started calling her by her name instead of the rich lady. And one evening, months after the Porsche ran, Victoria drove out to the garage with something in her hand, and she waited until Noah was asleep in the back room over his homework, and she gave it to Ethan without a word. It was the original Porsche badge, from her father's collection. The one thing she'd kept when she sold nearly everything else. "I used to think," Victoria said, "that success was owning things nobody else could afford, that the more untouchable you were, the more you'd won. My father half believed it too at the end, and it cost him his life because he couldn't imagine that the man he'd made rich would want more than money." She pressed the badge into Ethan's hand and closed his fingers around it. You taught me the other thing. The thing my father was trying to say in that letter with his last honest breath. Success isn't becoming someone nobody can touch. It's becoming someone people can trust. You're the most successful man I've ever met, Ethan Carter. And I spent my whole life around billionaires. Ethan looked at the badge in his hand. I mocked you, Victoria said. The first day, in front of everyone. I offered to marry you as a joke because the idea was absurd to me. The mechanic and the CEO. She was very close now, and her voice had dropped, and there was no armor left in it at all. I don't think it's absurd anymore. I think it might be the least absurd thing I've ever considered, but I'm not going to make it a joke this time. I'm going to say it plainly like my father finally learned to, and then it's yours to answer however you want. She took a breath. Fix my father's car you said you would, and you did. And somewhere in 4 months of you fixing that car, you fixed something in me I didn't know was broken. So I'm asking, not as a joke, as a woman who finally learned how to see. Will you have me Ethan Greasenall, and Ethan Carter, the single father, the struggling mechanic, the man they laughed at, the man who'd held the light, looked at the woman who had once filed him under nothing, and then done the rarest thing a human being can do, which is look again and see everything and change. He thought about a wife he'd lost and a life that had gone small and scared. He thought about a 9-year-old asleep in the next room who'd told him to be first to tell the story so his story would win. He thought about Henry Osgood and a badge in his hand and an engine that had waited over a year to tell the truth to the one man patient enough to listen. You know, Ethan said slowly, the first day when you offered I didn't laugh. Everybody laughed but me. And you asked me later why. You never did get an answer. Why didn't you laugh? Because I looked at you offering yourself as a prize. You were sure I could never win, Ethan said, and I didn't see a joke. I saw a person so certain of her own worth and so blind to everybody else's that she'd turned into stone and didn't even know it. And I thought that's the saddest thing I've seen in this whole rich, sad house. That's a person who's got everything and can't see a single thing that matters. He reached up and touched her face gently with a hand that would never fully come clean of the honest work it did. And I thought, God, if somebody could just get her to look, just once, what she might turn out to be. Victoria's eyes filled. And now, she whispered. Now I'm looking at what you turned out to be, Ethan said. And my answer's yes, Greasenall. They were married in the spring in the yard behind the garage with Walter Briggs standing up as best man, because Henry couldn't, and Walter was the closest thing left, and Noah holding the rings, and the silver-blue Porsche parked in the drive with its engine warm, because Ethan had driven it that morning just to hear it, just because a father should hear a thing like that on a day like that. It wasn't a story anyone would have predicted that first day at the mansion. The CEO and the mechanic, the woman who owned everything, and the man she'd filed under nothing. But that's the thing the whole valley eventually understood, the thing that traveled further than any crime or any fortune, that a person's worth was never in the driving or the wearing or the owning. It was never in what the world could see. It was in the thing a man does when a killer offers him his son's future for his silence, and he says no. It was in the thing a woman does when everything she believed about herself turns out to be wrong, and instead of breaking, she looks again. Marcus Vail had spent 30 years believing that everything and everyone had a price. He'd been right about almost all of it. He'd bought coroners and appraisers and cops and lawyers and 3 generations of a family's trust. But he'd broken himself against the one thing his money couldn't touch: an ordinary man in a grease-stained jacket who'd decided a long time ago in a garage that smelled of oil and coffee and second chances exactly who he was going to be. And no price, no threat, no offer of a whole stolen future had been able to move him 1 single inch. The man they laughed at became the man who saved everything. And the woman who thought she knew his value learned before it was too late. The truth. Her father died trying to teach her that you never measure a person by what they drive, or what they wear, or how much they own. You measure them by what they do when nobody is watching, and whether when the whole world offers them a price, they are still the kind of person who says no.